In this episode, I'm going to talk about some of the coolest things on two wheels in the 1980s. That's right, we're going to talk about the coolest motorcycles, so stick around. Hello, welcome to Days of Dorker Past. My name is Rob, and in this episode, that's right, I'm going to talk about the coolest motorcycles of the 1980s. Now, of course, it's become a common thread when people re-explore the 80s in TV shows and movies that the kids are always on their bicycles. The thing is, that's just not a trope. That was what really happened. And me, I can speak personally, lived and died by my BMX bike. I had a little Huffy that I rode up and down the road all over town almost every day of the week. Either rain or shine. That was my escape. And unfortunately nowadays, kids don't seem to be using their bikes as a means of escape like we used to have to. But one of the things was there were so many cool motorcycles within pop culture that it was fun to pretend that I was any one of them while I was pedaling around. Number one on the list is the light cycle from Tron. Now, to be honest, the use of the light cycle in the movie was pretty scary. It was used as part of the game. It was a game of cat and mouse of the bikes would zip along the grid, leaving a wall behind them, and the point was to cut off an opponent and have them explode. Now, that being very scary, the bikes themselves were very awesome. I mean, who wouldn't want a motorcycle that glowed red or blue and zipped along at blinding speeds? At the time that the movie came out, there was a very short-lived toy line that you could get the little bikes, but I never got one. But one thing I did always flock to was the arcade game, where it was just a very easy, rudimentary as you go up and down the grids, leaving your wall behind you. But still, in my mind, I was racing up and down the grid, and I wish I could say I was a champion. Probably not. Wasn't good at games then. It was great to see them return in the Tron Legacy movie. And that's a underrated gem if you haven't seen it. That is a great callback and a great sequel that pulls on all the best parts of the nostalgia of the original film. Number two on the list, and forgive me if I'm wrong at this, but I don't know if these had a proper name, but the motorcycles in the movie Megaforce. Let alone they are very awesome because they're pretty typical motorcycles, but when you first encounter them, they have missiles on them, probably the size of this pen, that were anti-tank. I mean, they were blowing stuff up left and right, popping wheelies, jumping over stuff. I mean, it was just a kid's dream come true of motocross, dirt bike, awesome, extravaganza with these bikes. And of course later we find out that the bikes can fly, which is even more awesome. I remember up and down this one street in my town where the roots had pushed up the sidewalks into these nice ramps, and I would come zooming down this hill and hit them and fly through the air. And at that moment I was Barry Boswick, just zooming through the clouds on my rocket bike, whatever you want to call it. But very awesome. We never did get toys, and most people think that that movie should just be left in the past. But still very awesome motorcycles and other vehicles in that movie. Next on the list at number 3 is Street Hawk. Now, Street Hawk was a show where I guess it was trying to be somewhat like Knight Rider, but the motorcycle wasn't intelligent. It was highly advanced, but wasn't intelligent. And Rex Smith, who at the time was known for being on Solid Gold, I think, which was a music dance type show, and later on would appear as Matt Murdock in the Trial of the Incredible Hulk movie. But he played a policeman that was injured in the line of duty, I believe, and he couldn't be a policeman anymore, but at night he was the vigilante Street Hawk on his awesome motorcycle that could do great things like jump over other cars when he was in pursuit. And I might be completely wrong, I might be thinking about Kit here, but it had some like computer jamming equipment or something on it. I don't remember a lot about that show, but I do remember that they would speed up the motion of him zipping down the street, and you'd see car lights and stoplights and stuff super fast as he was turbo speeding up the street. And that's exactly what I would pretend to be on my bike, that I was turbo zooming around and doing little jumps and going up and down the alleys of the small town that I lived in. Now, number 4 on the list is the toy line Mask. Now, Mask had 3 different motorcycles within its line, and each one of them was awesome. Now, if you don't know, Mask was Mobile Assault Strike Command, I think was the name, what the acronym was for Mask. But they were normal vehicles and some other objects that could transform into battle-ready vehicles. My favorite and probably the most popular of the motorcycles was Condor, which was a green racing, like Kawasaki style motorcycle that could turn into a helicopter. Very awesome. I still have mine today. I'll showcase it one time in an episode of It Came From. But next one that I loved was also a motorcycle called Vampire. One thing I loved about it, the dude's mask that had Vampire had a cutout at the top and his blonde hair poked out. It always reminded me of Pyro from the X-Men comics, how his blonde hair poked out of his mask. But Vampire was a little bit more technologically advanced in its transformation, yet still very simple, where the front would pop down and little wings would pop out so he could fly, and it had missiles that could shoot out of the sides on the little wings. But that was one of the bad guys. I believe the bad guy organization was called Venom, and he was on their team. And actually the third and final motorcycle that they released, Piranha, was also in Venom. It was a purple motorcycle with a sidecar, and the gist was that the sidecar could shoot off and be like a little one-man submarine thing with guns on it, and that was pretty cool. But it's one of those instances where, I mean, I never had one. Would love to have one day. But it was a vehicle meant for 2, but you only got 1 dude, so he had, you know, they should have included 2 with that one. But anyway, number 5 on the list is G.I. Joe. But of course, G.I. Joe. G.I. Joe also had 3 motorcycles in its toy line, and the first one being the Ram, which was one of the original vehicles that came out. Now, the Ram was just a typical green motorcycle with a sidecar that was actually a machine gun that was huge. It was about the size of the bike itself, and always wanted one, never had one. So simple yet so very awesome. I don't speak from experience, but I think the sidecar could pop off and you just had like a normal bike to tool around in. But great classic toy. The second one that they released was a Silver Mirage, and it was a little bit of a bulkier bike, silver of course by the name. It also had a sidecar that a Joe figure could sit in, and I believe the rider of the bike had this cool plate that could go over his back. I guess was supposed to be like an armor thing, so he wouldn't get shot in the back while driving around. But that was an awesome bike as well. I mean, very well made. I mean, the Joe line, top to bottom, was well made, which me and Chris, when he's here, have talked about that ad nauseum. Best toy line ever. Now, the third one came many years later, and that's the Dreadnought cycle. Unfortunately, the Dreadnoughts should have had typical bikes. They should have repainted the ram in their color scheme, teal, purples, what have you. But they never did. But the Dreadnought cycle was this huge trike that had a crow's nest thing turret on the back with a big gun that could move around. And, if you think about the logistics of it, that's pretty weird, because if that thing spun too fast or was top heavy, it would have toppled the whole bike. But that's what we got as far as Dreadnoughts and their motorcycles, when motorcycles were their main forte. Very odd that Hasbro never capitalized on the Dreadnoughts that way. They just repainted a lot of other vehicles as mail-aways and exclusives that I never saw. Now, number 6 on the list is something I hold near and dear, and that is the Cyclone motorcycle from Robotech. Now, the Cyclone, what makes it super awesome and filled my imagination was the fact that the motorcycle could transform into armor that would go up onto the driver and make him a small personalized mech. And had missile pods on the arms. Some of them even had retractable blades out of the... Anyway, very awesome. I would pretend, if I pull up my bike, and then dropped it down, that I was in a Cyclone running around. Now, there's somewhat controversy around it, because originally in Japan, it released as a show called Mopeda, I believe it was called, which was an entirely different series. No way intersecting with Robotech at all. But when they brought Robotech over here as our after-school cartoon, they cobbled it together with a couple other cartoons, Macross and I forget the Southern Cross storyline, but Genesis at the end was actually Mopeda. Excuse me for the computer. But that was the motorcycle that I wished I could have, even in toy form. Ugh, I always go back to that, wanting that. Anyway, this has just been a quick episode talking about the 6 best motorcycles from pop culture in the 1980s. I'm sure that there's more, but they just never fueled my imagination as much as these 6 different items. Actually, more than 6 if you count Mask and G.I. Joe each having 3. Anyway, this has just been a short episode, so if you like what you saw, hit the subscribe. If I missed any bikes that you loved, just please leave them in the comments. Tell me about them. Tell me about what fueled your imagination when you rode your bike back in the day. Do you still bike and sometimes use your imagination to get you to the next mile? Let me know. But until then, keep being rad, stay dorky, and I'll catch you next time. Thank you for watching this episode presented by My Side of the Laundry Room. Please check out some of these other recommended videos, and if you enjoyed what you've watched, please hit the subscribe button. You can also follow on Twitter, like on Facebook, and read up on My Side of the Laundry Room at our blog. Thanks for watching. Until next time, keep being rad and stay dorky.